Hello, welcome to Synergy's first biology video, and this lesson will be on taxonomy or classification of organisms. So first, what is taxonomy? As defined by Encyclopedia Britannica, taxonomy is the classification of living and extinct organisms, and sets up arrangement of the kinds of plants and animals in hierarchies of superior and subordinate groups. So first, we'll be going over the levels of classification and the 8 levels of hierarchy. So the 8 levels of hierarchy are domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So as we go down the hierarchy, the levels move more towards specificity with other organisms. So at each sublevel, the organisms become more closely related. So as seen in this figure, you can see that at the top, domain has the largest bar as it encompasses all organisms. But then as you see that as it goes down, the bars get smaller and smaller as they get more specific to the organism. So for example, you can see at the bottom, species is the smallest bar, as the organisms within one species will be the most closely related to each other. So one way you can remember this hierarchy is Dear King Philip came over for good soup. The D being domain, K for kingdom, P for phylum, C for class, O for order, F for family, G for genus, and S for species. So first we'll go over domain, which is the highest taxonomic rank. So with the 3-domain system, there are 3 domains of life: the archaea, the bacteria, and the eukarya. And the 3-domain system groups organisms based on differences in their ribosomal RNA structure. So organisms in the archaea domain versus the bacteria domain and the eukarya domain will all have different RNA structures. First, the archaea domain is comprised of prokaryotic cells, which have membranes made up of branched hydrocarbon chains. They do not have peptidoglycan in their cell walls, and they are not sensitive to some bacteria antibiotics. However, they are sensitive to some eukarya antibiotics, and they are known for living in extreme environments. Next, the bacteria domain is common in human life, found almost everywhere. This encompasses prokaryotic cells, like archaea, and their membranes are made up of unbranched fatty acid chains attached to glycerol. These include peptidoglycan in their cell walls. Unlike archaea, they are sensitive to traditional antibacterial antibiotics, but they are resistant to most eukarya antibiotics. Lastly, the eukarya domain, which can also be spelled eukarya with a C, encompasses eukaryotic organisms in which their membranes are made up of unbranched fatty acid chains attached to glycerol, just like bacteria. However, unlike bacteria, they do not have peptidoglycan in their cell walls, which is similar to archaea. Eukarya are resistant to traditional antibacterial antibiotics and sensitive to eukaryotic cell antibiotics. The next group we'll be going over is kingdom, which is between domain and phylum. These are based on similarities or common characteristics, such as cell type, nutrient acquisition, and reproduction. For cell type, the 2 main types are prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells are unicellular and lack a nucleus to encompass their genetic material, making their genetic material free-floating. On the other hand, eukaryotic cells do have a nucleus to encompass their genetic material and can be either unicellular or multicellular. For nutrient acquisition types, these include photosynthesis, absorption, ingestion, and more. Lastly, in regards to reproduction types, these include asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. So within the 3-domain system, there are 6 kingdoms of life, being Animalia, Plantae, Fungi, Protista, Eubacteria, and Archaebacteria. Animalia are animal organisms, and these depend on plants and other organisms for nutrition. These belong to the eukarya domain, are multicellular eukaryotes, and oxygen is needed for metabolism. Their method of nutrient acquisition is ingestion, and mostly sexual reproduction is used. However, asexual reproduction is also used in some. Next, the Plantae kingdom encompasses plants, which are important to all life on Earth. These provide oxygen, shelter, clothing, food, and medicine for all other living organisms. This contains vascular and non-vascular plants, flowering and non-flowering plants, and lastly seed-bearing and non-seed-bearing plants. Also, plants are known to be primary producers, making them essential to the food chain. Next, fungi include both unicellular and multicellular organisms, the unicellular ones being yeast and molds, and multicellular being mushrooms. Fungi are not capable of photosynthesis unlike plants. They belong to the eukarya domain, making them eukaryotic organisms. They do need oxygen for metabolism, and their method of nutrient acquisition is absorption. Fungi use spores to reproduce, and this can be done through sexual or asexual reproduction. Next, within the Protista kingdom, some organisms have characteristics of animals, making them protozoa, while others resemble plants like algae or fungi, which are slime molds. Protista belong to the eukarya domain, making them eukaryotic organisms, and oxygen is needed for metabolism. Protista may use absorption, photosynthesis, or ingestion, and it depends on their species. And in regards to their reproduction, it is mostly asexual, but in some species, meiosis does occur. Next, eubacteria live in almost every type of environment, and while they are often associated with disease, most do not cause disease. Eubacteria are part of the bacteria domain, and they are prokaryotic organisms. For eubacteria, oxygen may be toxic, tolerated, or needed for metabolism, and it does depend on their species. Their method of nutrient acquisition also depends on their species, and such may be absorption, photosynthesis, or chemosynthesis. Lastly, archaebacteria are part of the archaea domain, in which these are prokaryotic organisms. For metabolism, it depends on the species, in which oxygen, hydrogen, carbon dioxide, sulfur, or sulfide may be needed for metabolism. For nutrient acquisition, it also depends on the species, where they use absorption, non-photosynthetic photophosphorylation, or chemosynthesis. And lastly, archaebacteria use asexual reproduction to grow and reproduce. So our third group is phylum, which is between kingdom and class. Phylum is a group of related classes and is divided based on shared physical or developmental characteristics. To continue, of the 35 approximated phyla, there are 9 major ones, which include organisms such as sponges, jellyfish, flatworms, roundworms, squid, starfish, etc. Next, our fourth group is class, which is between phylum and order, and this group contains related orders. There are numerous classes, but for example, there are 108 different classes in the Animalia kingdom. Some common ones include Mammalia, which is mammals, Aves, which is birds, and Reptilia, which is reptiles. Next, order is between class and family, and this contains related families. An example of order is Carnivora, which are meat eaters. Sixth, family is between order and genus, and there are currently thousands of families, in which one is Canidae. Seventh, genus is the group between family and species, and as of March 2021, there are 97,234 genera. Lastly, species is the lowest taxonomic rank, and as of March 2021, there are 492,317 species, according to the NCBI. So within the group of species, there are also subspecies, and these are members of the same species that are capable of mating and producing viable offspring. These are considered separate subspecies due to their geographic or behavioral isolation, or other factors. For example, in the organism name Canis lupus familiaris, the familiaris will represent the subspecies. So, as you can see here, this is a diagram of a dog showing the domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, and subspecies. So, next we're going to move on to naming organisms, where we will also be looking back at that figure of the dog. So, as an overview, an organism's full name technically has 8 terms. Each name is capitalized except for species, and genus and species are italicized. For example, the full name of a dog, and we can go back to the diagram, as you can see, is Eukarya, Animalia, Chordata, Mammalia, Carnivora, Canidae, Canis, and Canis lupus, with the subspecies being Canis lupus familiaris. So the name at each level is called a taxon. To continue, scientists generally only use genus and species when naming an organism. This is called binomial nomenclature, which is an organism's two-word scientific name. For example, a dog's binomial nomenclature would be Canis lupus. And the common name is one that is typically used by people, which is dog. So now I have a few practice questions. So here it is given the 8 classifications of a cat, and now I would like you to try giving the scientific name of this cat. So now take a moment to pause the video and try it yourself. So hopefully you arrived at the conclusion that the cat's name would be Felis catus, as you can see by the genus and the species. And you do want to make sure that the scientific name is italicized, with the genus being capitalized and the species being lowercase. So for the second practice question, looking at the classification for the cat as shown before and the dog that was previously shown, at what level do cats and dogs begin to have different taxa? So now take a moment again to pause the video and try the question yourself. So hopefully you arrived at the conclusion that it is family. As you can see that from domain through order, dogs and cats have the same taxa, which are Eukarya, Animalia, Chordata, Mammalia, Carnivora, and then at family it changes for cats to be Felidae and dogs to be Canidae. And then from then on, the genus and the species and even the subspecies change. So thank you all for watching, and I hope you learned a bit more about the order of classification from this video.